The Washington Post has an opinion piece calling Columbus Day the result of toxic immigration politics, racial violence, and one president's actions. See, it's all about racism and white supremacy. So welcome back to the Channel Culture Confederacy here. It's Sunday night. Happy Sunday, everybody. So this came out, I believe, yesterday. Let me double check the date on this. Was it yesterday or today? No, it came out today, the 13th. And this is an article by C.W. Goodyear, the author of President Garfield, From Radical to Unifier. They've got a picture here of a statue of Columbus. Well, is this a racist, sexist, homophobic holiday? And if you're new to the channel, no fancy graphics, epic soundtracks, pretty boy camera angles. It's you, me, my smartphone, the news of the day, and this mission, this crusade to preserve great art, music, history, and culture. And now it's coming out. Now it's coming out that there's a very strong possibility based on DNA, and this is at Reuters, that Christopher Columbus was actually a Sephardic Jew who lived in Spain. But he wanted to be buried in Haiti when he died. But then the body got moved, I think, to Cuba, then to finally to Seville, Spain. So it says here, another Columbus Day will soon be upon us, and many Americans will spend the occasion debating the propriety of observing the holiday. The explorer's arrival in the New World in 1492 came at a horrendous cost to indigenous people. Horrendous cost to indigenous people. Was that necessarily true? Because I have an anecdote here, and this is at Wikipedia. You can go and research this yourself now. Have it at Wikipedia that actually Christopher Columbus was somewhat woke. He saved some people from these native tribes from being put in bondage, for being sex slaves. Well, we'll get to that here in a moment. These are important conversations, but they'll likely overlook an important bit of history because Columbus Day's origins are much bloodier and more complicated than many realize. Now, this is funny because I've talked about this several times before here on the channel. This incident that happened in New Orleans, 1891, where you had 11 Italian Americans who were lynched within feet, by the way, of the Confederate monument over the death of David Hennessy, who was the police chief or police commissioner, whatever it was at the time in New Orleans. And there was huge anti-Italian sentiment. But the author of this article doesn't get it. See, he's seen things through the lens of race. He's not looking at the bigger picture here. The story begins in Louisiana. Also talks here about this holiday being the unexpected result of toxic immigration politics of the Gilded Age, racial violence in the South, and the actions of a mostly forgotten president. So we go to Louisiana, 1890. So police chief David Hennessy was shot on October 15th, 1890, mortally wounded. And Hennessy was asked for the identity of his assailants. His reply was a racial slur for Italian Americans. Italian immigrants were having a rough go of it in the late 19th century America, as were the Polish and the Italians, some Germans, and you had these other groups, the Irish. So all these groups, the lower classes, including blacks, freedmen, they were all lumped into the same social and economic class. And because of that, because they were competing with each other for jobs, you name it, this created a lot of tension between these groups. Italian immigrants were having a rough go of it, as I said, in the late 19th century. Many have reached the United States following the Civil War, fleeing instability at home and seeking opportunity on this side of the Atlantic. Unfortunately, their eagerness to work, readiness to accept low pay, and strong cultural cohesion especially on the matters of family, faith, and language, that's in parentheses, stirred resentment among Americans already here. In New Orleans, these tensions were exacerbated by a spike in crime that was blamed on Italians bringing their supposed mafioso, I can't even read tonight, culture to America. Hatred for the immigrants practically became official city policy. As the mayor said on the record to reporters, Italians in New Orleans lacked honor, truth, pride, religion, or any quality that goes to make a good citizen. Except the Poles, we know of no other nationality which is as objectionable as these people. Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't you have anti-Italian sentiment in New York City? And so Hennessy's assassination catalyzed an awful cycle of ethnic violence in New Orleans. Taking the cue of their chief's dying words, police fanned out under orders to, quote, arrest every Italian you come across. But subsequent mistrials and acquittals of apprehended suspects prompted thousands of frustrated citizens to break into the city jail on the morning of March 14, 1891, and kill every Italian they could find. Bodies dangled from French Quarter lampposts by the afternoon. The murders would be described by Gambino and other historians as the, quote, largest lynching in American history. The largest lynching incident in American history. A lot of these lynchings back in the day were isolated incidents. Involved maybe one, possibly two people. But to that date, as of March 14, 1891, this was known as the largest lynching in American history. Much of America reacted with approval. The sentiment was echoed coast to coast by what Gambino estimated to be half of America's newspapers, including this one, the Washington Post. The Post described the lynchings as, quote, the people's justice swift and sure visited upon those whom the jury in New Orleans had neglected to punish. Now, this is somewhat of a lengthy article, so I'm just going to jump to the next section here. So it talks about President Harrison. And noting that the upcoming date of October 21st, 1892 would be the 400th anniversary of the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus landing in the New World, it was a unique and convenient opportunity to publicly acknowledge the place of Italians in American history. So he decided to designate this day as Columbus Day to honor the achievements of Italians in American society. Italians' contributions to culture, to history over the past 400 years at that time. But he says there's problems here, according to the author. He says, finally, the case demonstrates how anti-immigrant rhetoric in the United States rhymes through the ages. What was said about Italians in the 19th century has been repeated for every subsequent nationality reaching our shores, but also fascinating how a holiday that was popularized, in part to atone for America's past crimes against one group of people, is now being reevaluated for how it neglects those committed against another. And the author goes on to say that this holiday has become something entirely different than what it was originally intended. Really? Maybe it's you, the author of this article, who is trying to make it into something that it never was. So was Christopher Columbus a bad guy? Christopher Columbus was a man of his time. Christopher Columbus was a man of his time. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but in the year that he set sail, ocean blue, 1492, that was also the same year that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had passed this decree. And this decree required that all citizens in Spain at the time, that they convert to Catholicism. I think it was called the Alhambra Decree. And at the time, there were 300,000 Jewish people living in Spain, different parts of Spain. So when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella came together, were married, they brought the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon together to form what we now know as modern-day Spain. Spain has a very fascinating, very interesting history if you go back and read it. I'm reading this stuff, it's like, wow, I didn't know that. It's pretty cool, actually. Little side here, my great-grandfather designed the electronics for the USS Enterprise, and it's believed that there's some Spanish in our family, and they were stationed for 3 years, I think it was, in Spain in the early 1960s. They lived across the street from a 13th century castle. Pretty cool. We've got pictures of it. So in 1492, the year that Columbus, he had found favor with the king and queen, but if all indications are that he was actually a Sephardic Jew living in Spain at the time, then somehow he had found favor with the king and queen in Spain. I want to say England, but in Spain. And so he sets sail for the New World, and here's what happens when he gets to the Americas. I think he was trying to get to Asia, but he mistaken as being Asia, but turns out it was near the Caribbean. So if you go to Wikipedia, they talk here about his first contact with the natives in that part of the world. So let me get to that part here. So he wrote about his experiences, his first interaction with the natives here. And this is what he entered in his journal on October 12, 1492. Many of the men I have seen have scars on their bodies, and when I made signs to them to find out how this happened, they indicated that people from other nearby islands had come to San Salvador to capture them. They defended themselves the best they can. I believe that people from the mainland come here to take them as slaves. They ought to make good and skilled servants, for they repeat very quickly whatever we say to them. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. So you have native tribes enslaving people from other tribes, and we're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day? Scratching my head on that one. But Columbus is evil. You have to understand, folks, these people were people of their time. And because of the lack of technology, because most of these tribes were isolated, they didn't have access to the technology, or they didn't have really a way to communicate with people from, let's say, Europe, who were just stepping on the continent for the first time. Well, of course, it goes back to the Vikings. You have the Nordic people. Was it Leif Erikson? Went through Canada. But this is what Columbus wrote about the natives. I think they can be very easily made Christians, for they seem to have no religion. If it pleases our Lord, I will take 6 of them to your highness when I depart, in order that they may learn our language. Oh, that's so racist. White dominance. But when he came back, and this was on his first return, he had rescued 20 natives from the Caribs, from the Caribs, who believed in cannibalism, and saved them from, because at the time, Columbus was told that they would castrate the males, and then the males, I believe, would later be eaten. So Columbus, as I said, was a man of his time. He was a man of his time. And he was encountering these people for the first time. Was he perfect? No. No man is perfect. But I thought I'd share this article with you, and it's just funny to me that he's talking about how this holiday is toxic, and it's racist and sexist, homophobic, what have you, insensitive to Native Americans or indigenous peoples. And yet, the violence committed against these Italian Americans was violence committed against people who were white, who were European. Sounds like this author needs to go back and reread their history. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Thank you for letting me work my way through this, a one-take video today. You can also follow me at Instagram, hashtag Jason Composes, because I write music in my spare time, or you can go to X, Cultural Confederacy, Culture Confed1 on X, or you can find me at Substack. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out, stay safe, everybody. God bless this thing called the United States. I'll catch you next time, and y'all have a great Sunday night. Take care.